Now 2.3.10. The Buddha said, monks, these two conditions have part in knowledge. What two? Samatha and vipassana. Tranquilization and contemplation. If cultivated, what profit does samatha or tranquilization attain? The mind is cultivated. What profit results from a cultivated mind? All lust is abandoned. Monks, if contemplation, vipassana, is cultivated, what profit does it attain? Insight is cultivated. If insight is cultivated, what profit does it attain? All ignorance is abandoned. A mind defiled by lust is not set free, nor can insight defiled by ignorance be cultivated. Indeed, monks, this ceasing of lust is the mind's release. This ceasing of lust is liberation by mind. This ceasing of ignorance is liberation by wisdom. That's the end of the sutta. This is one of the suttas which are quite important as far as meditation is concerned, because here the Buddha is saying that two conditions bring us knowledge, samatha and vipassana. The Buddha didn't say one, the Buddha said two conditions result in knowledge, samatha and vipassana. And then the Buddha says that by cultivating samatha, finally the lust is abandoned, and by cultivating vipassana, you get insight. And then finally, all ignorance is abandoned. Sometimes people translate this word vipassana as insight. But here you notice that vipassana, if cultivated, results in insight or wisdom. So, vipassana cannot be insight or wisdom. Vipassana is something that is practiced, will result in insight or wisdom. Therefore, the proper translation should be contemplation. In Chinese, it's translated as Zhi Guan. Zhi for samatha and Guan, contemplation, for vipassana. And then finally, the Buddha is saying that the mind defiled by lust is not set free, nor can insight defiled by ignorance be cultivated. In other words, the Buddha is saying that both are necessary, that lust must be abandoned and ignorance must be abandoned. That's why the Buddha is saying that both samatha and vipassana are necessary. This word samatha, tranquilization, is the work of making the mind tranquil. And there are different levels for different stages of Aryahood. In two suttas in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha says that the Sotapanna and the Sakadagami, first and second stage Arya, they only have perfect sila, whereas the Anagami has perfect sila and samadhi, and the Arahant has perfect sila, samadhi and panya. So you can see that Anagami and Arahant have perfect samadhi, which is always stated in the suttas to be the four jhanas, or at least one pointedness of mind. So from here you can see that Sotapanna and Sakadagami in the Anguttara Nikaya does not require jhana. So from here you can see that samatha, the practice of tranquilizing the mind, has different levels for Sotapanna, Sakadagami, Anagami and Arahant. Samatha also leads to the lowering of the reduction of the hindrances. And in the Samyutta Nikaya and the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha says the condition for seeing things as they really are is samadhi. Nowadays, sometimes we have some controversy over the people who practice samatha and people who practice vipassana. But sometimes people get confused. The controversy should not be about whether samatha is better or vipassana is better, because both are necessary in the Buddha's teaching. if there's any controversy, it should be whether the Buddha's teaching is to practice both samatha and vipassana, or is it only that one is necessary? Just as nowadays some people are saying that only vipassana is necessary, but samatha is not necessary. For this, we see in one sutta in Anguttara Nikaya 4.170, where the Arahant Ananda said in his old age that there are only 4 ways to arahanthood. The first way is samatha first, followed by vipassana. The second method is vipassana first, followed by samatha. The third is samatha and vipassana at the same time. And the fourth is that you contemplate on the self, and then you attain one-pointedness of mind, and then the way is made clear, and then you realize the way to arahanthood. So from this sutta, we find that both samatha and vipassana are necessary, and there is nowhere in the sutta stated that you can attain arahanthood without one-pointedness of mind or jhanas, as was taught by the Buddha. Now, the other day I did not explain what you mean by liberation by mind and liberation by insight. These are the 2 ways a person attains arahanthood, and it is if we study the suttas, all the nikayas, then we find that there are 3 ways in which a person attains arahanthood. One is the person attains the 4 rupa jhanas, and then the 4 arupa jhanas, and then after that cessation of perception and feeling. And coming out from cessation of perception and feeling, then he attains this liberation. And the second one is he attains the 4 jhanas, and coming out of the 4 jhanas, he contemplates 4 noble truths, etc., and he becomes an arahant. The third way a person becomes an arahant, according to the suttas, is when he does not use the jhanas at the moment of liberation, like the case of the arahant Sariputta. Sariputta, according to one sutta, was fanning the Buddha, and the Buddha was talking to an external sect ascetic. And because of hearing the Dhamma, as the Buddha explained the Dhamma to the external sect ascetic, Sariputta, just from hearing, he attained arahanthood, and it is commented by the commentaries that Sariputta was liberated by wisdom. Now, there is one sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya where the Buddha said that Sariputta had attained all the jhanas, all the 4 rupa jhanas, all the 4 arupa jhanas, plus cessation of perception and feeling, nirodha samapatti. And so, a person who is liberated by wisdom, even though he does not use jhana at the moment of liberation, it does not mean that he does not have jhana. All arahants have jhana, because the Buddha said in 2 suttas in the Anguttara Nikaya that Sotapanna and Sakadagami, they have perfect sila. Anagami have perfect sila plus samadhi, and arahant has perfect sila, samadhi, and wisdom. Sila, samadhi, and panya. So, in the suttas, the perfect samadhi is always defined either as the 4 jhanas or one-pointedness of mind. So, the difference here between liberation by mind and liberation by insight or wisdom is that liberation by mind is the first 2 cases where they attain the jhanas, and coming out of the jhanas they contemplate and they become liberated, become arahant. So that is liberation by mind. Whereas liberation by insight is not using the jhanas at the moment of liberation, but because the mind is very clear due to the cultivation of jhana previously, and just from contemplation itself, that person attains arahanthood. So this is the liberation of by mind and liberation by wisdom. If you are interested in further details, you can look it up in my booklet called Samatha and Vipassana, where it's explained more in detail there. Now, the other thing about this sutta I would like to remark is it has to be read in conjunction with another sutta, Anguttara Nikaya 6.29. In that sutta 6.29, it is stated that the best condition for insight is a mind that is so concentrated that it is bright. A mind that is fully concentrated and is very bright. And that is the best condition for insight. In other words, it is saying that samatha, the practice of samatha, tranquilization of the mind, will give you insight or wisdom. And the other thing mentioned in that sutta is that to abandon lust, it is very good to practice contemplation on the 32 parts of the body. This contemplation of the 32 parts of the body is a vipassana practice, contemplation. So in other words, here it is saying, and in this sutta 6.29, that practicing of 32 parts of the body, contemplation or vipassana, leads to the abandonment of lust. And the practice of samatha, until the mind becomes concentrated and bright, is the best condition for insight. Now this is quite the opposite of the sutta I've just read just now, because just now that sutta says that when you practice samatha, tranquilization, it leads to the abandonment of lust, and vipassana will bring about insight. So that is why suttas have to be compared. If you just read one, you get a one-sided picture. So basically, what these two suttas also say is that samatha and vipassana are both necessary for knowledge or insight. Now we come to the next sutta, 2.4.1. The Buddha said, "Monks, I will teach you the condition of the unworthy and that of the worthy. Do you listen to it? Attend closely and I will speak." "Yes, Lord," replied these monks to the Exalted One. The Exalted One said, "Monks, the unworthy man is ungrateful, forgetful of benefits. This ingratitude, this forgetfulness is congenial to mean people. It is altogether a feature of unworthy people, this ingratitude and forgetfulness of benefits. But monks, the worthy person is grateful and mindful of benefits done to him. This gratitude, this mindfulness is congenial to the best people. It is altogether a feature of the best people, this gratitude and mindfulness of benefits." That's the end of the sutta. This sutta is telling us that we should be grateful to those people who have benefited us, especially our parents, our elders, our teachers, monks who have taught us, etc. And we should know that a person who is ungrateful, according to the Buddha, is a mean person. Especially people like our parents, whom we owe a lot. And we can see this in the next sutta. The next sutta, 2.4.2, the Buddha said, "Monks, one can never repay two persons, I declare." "What two?" "Mother and father. Even if one should carry about his mother on one shoulder and his father on the other, and so doing should live 100 years, attain 100 years, and if he should support them, anointing them with unguents, that is fragrant oil or something, kneading, bathing and rubbing their limbs, and they meanwhile should even void their excrements upon him, Even so, could he not repay his parents? Moreover, monks, if he should establish his parents in supreme authority, in the absolute rule over this mighty earth, abounding in the 7 treasures, not even thus could he repay his parents. What is the cause of that? Monks, parents do much for their children. They bring them up, they nourish them, they introduce them to this world. Moreover, monks, whoso incites his unbelieving parents, settles and establishes them in the faith. Whoso incites his immoral parents, settles and establishes them in morality. Whoso incites his stingy parents, settles and establishes them in liberality. Whoso incites his foolish parents, settles and establishes them in wisdom. Such a one, just by so doing, does more than repay what is due to his parents. That's the end of the sutta. So here the Buddha is saying that if we should take care of our parents for 100 years, taking good care of them, bathing and massaging them, etc., carrying them about on your shoulder, even for 100 years, you still cannot pay back the debt of the parents, owed to your parents, because when we are young, if all of us try to recall, we know on many occasions when we were young and helpless, when we were sick, many a times we could have passed away if not for the great care that our parents showered on us, especially our mother. All of us, we know that the mother usually takes more care of the children personally than the father. That's why in the Indian tradition they always talk about Mata Pitu, mother first, mother, father. Whereas in the Chinese tradition we always say father first and then mother. And so you see, even if we were to take good care of our parents until they died, it's difficult to repay their kindness. So you can think of a person who is not filial to his parents, somebody who does not take care of the parents, and after the parent has passed away, I've seen for myself somebody who was not very filial to the parent, and after the parent passed away, the remorse is very great, on that person, because the feeling that you have not done what you should have done to somebody whom you owe so much, it weighs down heavily on your conscience. Then the last part, the Buddha said, if we want to repay our parents, there are 4 ways where we can repay them, and repay them fully and even more than what is due. One is, if they do not have faith in the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, you bring them to listen to the teachings of the Buddha, or you lend them tapes to listen, etc., and so that they have faith in the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. Then you have there's one way you have repaid your parents. The second one, if they do not know how to keep the precepts, they don't know about Sila, you teach them to keep the 5 precepts. That's another way you repay them, so that they are established in Sila. The third way is if they are stingy, they don't know how to do dana, offerings, then you teach them to like to do charity, to be generous. That's the third way. The fourth one, if they do not have wisdom, and you teach them the Dhamma, or you get them to listen to cassettes, etc., of the Buddha's teachings, so that they understand, and then their wisdom grows. These are the 4 ways that any one of them, or all of them, we can use to pay our parents' kindness. Why are these 4 ways important? Because you bring the parents into the right path. By having any one of these 4, if they are well established in any one of these 4 things, faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, keeping the Sila precepts. Third one, being generous, liking to do dana, offerings, and the fourth one is having wisdom, then at least they would not fall into the woeful plains in the next life. And if they are well established, especially like in wisdom, they might never ever fall into the woeful plains again, and slowly get out of samsara. Now the next sutta is 2.4.4. Now the house father Anathapindika came to visit the Exalted One, and saluted him and sat down at one side. So seated, he said this to the Exalted One: "Pray, Lord, how many in the world are worthy of offerings, and where should an offering be made?" Then the Buddha answered, "Two in the world, house father, are worthy of offerings, the learner and the adept. These two are worthy of offerings in the world, and here an offering should be made." And that's the end of the sutta. Now this is one of the suttas that we need to comment on, otherwise people may have some wrong biased interpretation or extreme interpretations. The Buddha is saying that two types of persons are worthy of offerings, and these two types are Aryan persons. The first one is a learner. A learner is what is called a Sukha. Sukha, S-E-K-H-A. Sukha means one who is training. And one who is training is a person who has attained the first path, or the first fruit, or the second path, or the second fruit, the third path, or the third fruit, and the fourth path. These are the 7 types of persons. And the adept is the Aseka, A-S-E-K-H-A, Aseka. Aseka is one who is no more learning. That means an Arahant. Arahant is a fourth fruit person. And these areas, there are 8 areas. It's not that there are 4 areas, there are 8 areas. Later on, we can see some suttas which can prove that you have 8 persons actually, not 4. There are some teachings, some later books, like the Abhidhamma and commentaries, which say that when a person attains the path, he immediately attains the fruit. But later I can show you some suttas where it is not quite so. You can have a person who is on the path, and he can be on the path for many years before he attains the fruit. So here the Buddha is saying that these Aryans are worthy of offering. And it is partly because of a sutta like this. There are some people, they due to the greed for merit, sometimes they only like to make offerings to monks that they think are Aryans, and they think that other monks are not worthy of offerings, and this is not the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha has said in some other sutta, I think in the Anguttara Nikaya, that if you make offerings to monks with a selfish motive to get such and such merit, then it reduces your merit. That's one thing we have to know. The other thing is, the Buddha has stated in the Anguttara Nikaya 4.60 that it is the lay person's duty to supply the Sangha with the 4 requisites. The 4 requisites that a monk needs are the 4 essentials of existence. The first one is food, the second one is robes, the third one is place to stay, and the fourth one is medicine or medical care. And the Buddha said it is a lay person's duty to supply monks with these 4 requisites. And if lay persons don't take care of the Sangha, then who is the Sangha to turn to? They might as well disrobe and earn their own salary if lay people don't support them. And Another thing is, there's another sutta where the Buddha said, in the future, I don't have the number of the sutta offhand. The Buddha said, in the future, there will be monks who wear the yellow robe, and they might be corrupt. They might not keep the precepts, and they might not practice the spiritual path, etc. Even then, the Buddha said, if you make offerings to them, still it is meritorious. Why? Because if we make offerings to the Sangha, then it helps to perpetuate the Sangha. And even if at a certain stage the Sangha do not practice well, later there's always a chance that you might get Arahants again. Just like in Sri Lanka, certain countries like Sri Lanka, there was a time when the monks were corrupt. And so some people were so disillusioned that some monks, they went to Burma, they went to Thailand to reordain and come back and establish a new chapter, a new sect of Sangha, like for example the Siam Nikaya in Sri Lanka. It was started after a monk went over to Thailand, reordained with the Thai Sangha and came back. He wanted to change the Sangha. So it is important for lay people to continue to support the Sangha so that the Sangha can continue. If it is cut off, then it is forever cut off. And the Buddha said that it's always more meritorious to offer to the Sangha than a single monk. That's why we notice in the Vinaya, the Buddha's mother, that means the lady who looked after him as a mother, is actually his foster mother because his real mother died very soon after he was born. And the foster mother became a nun known as Mahapajapati. And after she became a nun, she decided to make a robe and offer it to the Buddha. So she came, and because of the love for the Buddha and the respect, she personally offered this robe to the Buddha. And the Buddha, out of compassion for her, refused to accept. The Buddha said, please offer it to the Sangha, because the Buddha wanted her to have more merit. But because of her sort of some attachment to the Buddha, the love, she didn't want to offer it to the Sangha, even though the merit might be less. She wanted to give it to the Buddha. Second time she came and offered it to the Buddha. Second time the Buddha refused, asked her to give it to the Sangha. Third time she came and offered to the Buddha. Third time the Buddha refused, asked her to give it to the Sangha. Both also had mutual love for each other. One wanted to give it to her, to him personally. The other one, out of love for her also, wanted her to have more merit, asked her to offer it to the Sangha. The other thing is, it is stated in the sutta that of all the material offerings that a person can give, the highest material offering is to make a monastery, either to offer the land for a monastery or to help build a monastery for the Sangha. And the Buddha said, by offering a monastery to the Sangha, the merit is higher than feeding the Buddha and all the Arahant disciples. All the Arahant disciples together, feeding them is not so meritorious as offering a monastery for the Sangha to live. Why? Because by offering a place for the Sangha to live, then the Sangha is perpetuated. It continues years and years and years. Now, the other thing is, lay people should not discriminate too much between monks. The Buddha said in one sutta that lay people should not be too attached to one particular monk. The details are given in that sutta. There's no need to mention it here. And why? Because it is very difficult for lay people to distinguish between monks. And in the suttas we find even an anagami, like the lay person Citta, Even though he's an anagami, when he invites monks to his house, he bows down to them. Even though they are putujana or what, even he is an anagami, he bows to the monks because he is bowing not to the particular monk, he is bowing to the sangha. The monks represent the sangha. In the Anguttara Nikaya 4.4, the Buddha says that if you treat 4 persons badly, you have wrong conduct towards 4 persons, you create much demerit. One is to the Buddha, the second one is to his disciples, that means his monk disciples. Third one is mother, the fourth one is father. Now I come to another sutta, 2.4.6. Once the Exalted One was staying near Savatthi at Jeta Grove in Anathapindika's park. Now a great number of devas of tranquil mind came to visit the Exalted One, and on coming to him saluted the Exalted One and stood at one side. So standing, those devas said this to the Exalted One: Lord, here is this Venerable Sariputta at East Park in the terrace house of Migara's mother, that means Visakha, teaching the monks about the person who is fettered inwardly and the person fettered outwardly. The company is delighted. It were a good thing, Lord, if the Exalted One would pay a visit to the Venerable Sariputta out of compassion for him. The Exalted One consented by silence. Then, even as a strong man might straighten out his bent arm or draw in his arm stretched out, even so did the Exalted One vanish from Jeta Grove and appear in the presence of the Venerable Sariputta at East Park in the terrace house of Migara's mother. And the Venerable Sariputta saluted the Exalted One and sat down at one side. As he thus sat, the Exalted One said this to the Venerable Sariputta: Sariputta, a great number of devas of tranquil mind came to visit me. And he repeated their request. That is, they asked the Buddha to visit Venerable Sariputta. Then the Buddha continued: Now, Sariputta, those devas, though numbering 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 or 60, yet they all stood in a space not greater than that made by the point of a gimlet, and that without crowding each other. Now you may think, Sariputta, surely it was yonder, that means in another world, that those devas' minds must have been trained to this attainment, namely, that though numbering 10, 20, 30, up to 60, yet they all stood in a space no greater than that made by the point of a gimlet, and that without crowding each other. But that is not how you must regard it, Sariputta. It was just here, Sariputta, that their mind was trained to this attainment. Wherefore, Sariputta, thus must you train yourself. We will become tranquil in senses and tranquil in mind. That is how you must train yourself. Indeed, Sariputta, those who are thus tranquil in sense, tranquil in mind, their bodily action also will be tranquil, and the same for speech and thought. Thus must you train yourself. We will present to our fellows in the holy life tranquility of speech and tranquility of thought, a present of tranquility. That is how you must train yourself. Those wanderers of other views, Sariputta, who have not heard this Dhamma teaching are utterly discomforted. That's the end of the sutta. Here in this sutta, the Buddha is saying that these devas, heavenly beings, 60 of them, stood in a space no greater than that made by the point of a gimlet. That means the point of a needle. All of them could stand at the point of a needle, such a small space, and without crowding each other. And the Buddha is saying that they did not train their mind to do this in the heaven world or somewhere. It was just here in the human plane. So this human plane, we can see, is a very important plane, because here we create a lot of karma, whereas in the other planes, we are reaping the results of our karma mainly. If we go to the heavens, you find that the devas, they enjoy themselves so much, and they are not thinking of cultivating themselves. They only think of enjoying themselves, and that is quite natural when we are in such a place. And then the beings in the lower planes, in the woeful planes, they are just reaping the bad fruit, the fruit of the bad karma. So they don't create so much new karma as the human plane. That's why the human plane, it is a very, very good plane for us to be, because that's a place where we cultivate ourselves. So even for this, like this, if we have strength of mind, and then next time when we become devas, we might be able to do that. Now we come to 2.5.3. Buddha said, monks, there are these two companies. What two? The distinguished and the ignoble. And what, monks, is the ignoble company? Herein, monks, in whatsoever company the monks are luxurious, lax, taking the lead in backsliding, shirking the duty of seclusion, and make no effort to reach the unattained, to win the goal not won, to realize the unrealized. The generation that follows comes to fall along with their view. That generation also is luxurious, lax, taking the lead in backsliding, shirking the duty of seclusion, and make no effort to reach the unattained, to win the goal not won, to realize the unrealized. This company, monks, is called the ignoble. And what, monks, is the distinguished company? Herein, monks, in whatsoever company the senior monks are not luxurious, not lax, not taking the lead in backsliding, not shirking the duty of seclusion, and they make an effort to reach the unattained, to win the goal not won, to realize the unrealized. The generation that follows them comes to fall along with their view. That generation also is not luxurious, not lax, etc., and make an effort to realize the unrealized. This company, monks, is called the distinguished. These are the two companies, and of these two, the distinguished company has the preeminence. The Buddha here, you see, the Buddha is talking about companies of monks. He's not talking about a single monk, because during the Buddha's time, monks used to group together in big numbers, and they would travel from one monastery to another. They would not stay long in one place, because they're supposed to be homeless, and they go from one place to another. And so the Buddha praised those monks who practice to win the goal of the spiritual life. 2.5.6. Monks, there are these two companies. What two? The company trained in bluster. Here, speaking means speaking empty, arrogant words, not in discussion by inquiry. And the company trained in discussion by inquiry, not in speaking empty, arrogant words. And what, monks, is the company trained in speaking empty, arrogant words, not inquiry? Herein, monks, in whatsoever company the monks listen not to the discourses uttered by the Tathagata, discourses profound, deep in meaning, transcending the world, dealing with emptiness when they are recited. They lend not a ready ear to them, apply not to them a mind bent on understanding, consider not that those teachings are something to be learned by heart and mastered. But when those discourses made by poets, tricked out with fair-sounding phrases, discourses external to Dhamma, utterances of disciples, when such are recited, they listen thereto, lend a ready ear to them, apply to them a mind bent on understanding, and consider that those teachings are something to be learned by heart and mastered. And when they have mastered that teaching, they do not question each other about it, do not open up a discussion thus, what is this? What is the meaning of this? When they neither open up the unrevealed, nor explain the unexplained, nor dispel doubts on diverse doubtful points of Dhamma, such a company, monks, is called trained in speaking empty, arrogant words, not in inquiry. And what, monks, is the company trained in inquiry, not trained in speaking empty, arrogant words? Herein, monks, in whatsoever company the monks listen not to those discourses made by poets, tricked out with fair-sounding phrases, discourses external to Dhamma, utterances of disciples. But listen to those uttered by the Tathagata, discourses profound, deep in meaning, transcending the world, dealing with emptiness, and having mastered that, question each other about it, open up discussion thus, what is this, what is the meaning of this? When such open up the unrevealed, explain the unexplained, and dispel doubts on diverse doubtful points of Dhamma, such a company is called trained in enquiry, not in speaking empty arrogant words. These are the two companies, and of these two, the latter has the preeminence. Here again, the Buddha is talking about two companies of monks. One is the monks who listen to the discourses of the Buddha, like the suttas here, like what you all are doing today. Listen to the Buddha's words. Whereas the second company are those who listen to the utterances of disciples. What are these discourses that are the utterances of disciples? Utterances of disciples are meant to be the teachings of later monks, because the disciples here refers to the monk disciples of the Buddha. The Buddha could see that in the future the later monks would write some new books and all that. So there are some people, instead of studying the Buddha's discourses, they prefer to study the words of these other monks. And the Buddha does not encourage that. The other thing about this you find is that the Buddha encouraged us to discuss and inquire whatever teachings we come across. We should inquire and discuss about it. In the Mangala Sutta, this is called Dhamma Sakkacha, discussion of Dhamma. In the Sangyutta Nikaya number 20, the 20th Sangyutta, the Buddha warned that in the future, people would not want to study and master the suttas, And because people are not interested in the suttas, instead of this, listening to the suttas, they'd rather listen to some other teachings, then it will cause the disappearance of the suttas. It is because the suttas are so important, that's why we take the trouble to read out these suttas, so that people can understand the real teachings of the Buddha. Some people would be surprised to learn that there's no such word as Tripitaka or Tipitaka spoken by the Buddha. Tipitaka was something that was coined later. In the suttas, we find the Buddha only mentions his teachings as Dhamma Vinaya. Dhamma are according to the Anguttara Nikaya, the Dhamma refers to the suttas. Suttas of the Buddha are called Dhamma, and Vinaya are the disciplinary rules for the monks. So the later books you find, like the commentaries and the Abhidhamma, there are certain contradictions. If you take the trouble to study the suttas in detail, then you'll find that there are certain contradictions, with the Abhidhamma, with the commentaries. So it is only the earliest four Nikayas that there are no contradictions. And these earliest four Nikayas are accepted by everyone, including Mahayana, including Tibetan Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism, as being the original words of the Buddha. And if we study the four Nikayas, we find that there are no contradictions in them. They are very consistent. That is why, because these are not controversial books, that it is best, if we want to study, to depend on the four Nikayas basically. In the Digha Nikaya number 26, the Buddha said, "Be a lamb unto yourselves. Be a refuge unto yourselves with no other refuge. Take the Dhamma as your lamb. Take the Dhamma as your refuge with no other refuge." So the Buddha is telling us that we take the Dhamma, the Buddha's teachings, to be our master. And that's why we always take refuge with the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. That means the original teachings of the Buddha, his original teachings, and those Aryan disciples. But the trouble is, sometimes it's hard to tell which are the Aryan disciples. So it was decided in the second Sangha Council about 100 years after the Buddha's passing away, that if any monks teaches anything that is consistent with the Buddha's teachings, then we listen to him. If they teach us anything that is inconsistent with the Buddha's teachings, that means in the suttas, we don't listen to them. That was decided 100 years after the Buddha's passing away. Now we come to 2.6.12. The Buddha said, monks, when in a dispute there is wordy warfare on both sides, with tenacity of view, malice of heart, sulkiness and discontent, one's personality is ruffled. Therefore, monks, it may be expected that this will conduce to protracted, bitter, contentious strife, and the monks will be unable to live at ease. But when in a dispute there is wordy warfare on both sides, with tenacity of view, malice of heart, sulkiness and discontent, one's personality is not ruffled. Then it may be expected that it will not conduce to protracted, bitter, contentious strife, and the monks will be able to live at ease. So here the Buddha is saying that what the Buddha is saying here concerns monks is also equally applicable to lay people. Namely, that if there's any wordy warfare, that means there's any quarrel or any dispute, we should not get emotionally upset, become emotionally ruffled. If we become emotionally ruffled or upset, then it will lead to a long, bitter strife. And whereas if you are not too emotionally involved, then that quarrel can end in not too long time. Sometimes when people practice mindfulness, if they don't have some samadhi, then when they become emotionally involved, then you find that all the mindfulness becomes lost. They're no more mindful. It's difficult to remain mindful when you become emotionally involved and emotionally upset. So you have to always practice this upekkha, this equanimity. Whatever happens in life, we try to remain equanimous. 2.10.1, the Buddha said, monks, there are these two fools. What two? He who shoulders a burden that does not befall him, and he who shirks a burden that befalls him. These are the two. And then 2.10.2, monks, there are these two wise ones. What two? He who shoulders a burden that befalls him, and he who takes not up one that does not befall him. These are the two. So these two suttas, the Buddha is saying that what is our duty, what is our burden, we should take it up. What is not our burden, we should not take it up. So if a person carries a burden that is not his burden, is a fool. Or the burden that he should carry, like for example towards his family and all that, if he does not carry that duty, that burden, then he's a fool again. Now we come to 2.11.2. Monks, these two persons are hard to find in the world. What two? The one who is first to do a favor, and he who is grateful for what is done. These are the two persons hard to find in the world. That's the end of the sutta. You see, this person who is first to do a favor, few people would want to do a kind deed towards somebody unless he owes that person a kind deed. For a person to do a favor first means he is willing to do without any precondition. And that kind of person is rare to find. And then also a person who is grateful. Very often we find that we have done something for somebody, and later when we need a favor from him, he's forgotten that we have been kind to him before. So these are the two persons hard to find. Now 2.11.8 Monks, these two things are causes for the arising of wrong view. What two? Another's utterance and antara consideration, yoniso manasikara. 2.11.9 Monks, these two things are the causes for the arising of right view. What two? Another's utterance and thorough attention or thorough consideration. These are the two suttas. Now this right view, if a person has right view, then he is considered to be a sotapanna, one who has entered the stream and Arya. So here it is saying that to get right view, we just have to listen to another's utterance. That means that another's teaching, and then you consider it thoroughly. You pay close attention, you pay proper attention, you consider it, and you might be able to get right view. And for wrong view also, you hear, and then you don't consider properly, and you might end up with wrong view, especially if you hear wrong teaching, and you accept it because you don't have thorough attention or thorough consideration. So from this sutta, it appears like it is possible just from listening to the Dhamma to attain right view or enter the stream. And this seemed to have happened during the Buddha's time. Many people who came to listen to the Buddha teach the Dhamma, very soon after that the Buddha said that entered the stream. Now 2.12.1 the Buddha said, the believing monk, if he would aspire perfectly, should thus aspire. May I be like unto Sariputta and Moggallana. Monks, these are a sort of scale, these are a sort of measure for my disciples who are monks, namely Sariputta and Moggallana. Now the reason I'm reading this is again that there's a contradiction with the Mahayana suttas, and the Buddha here is saying that all his monk disciples should be like Sariputta and Moggallana. Sariputta is supposed to have the highest wisdom, and Moggallana is the psychic power is the best. So it is not like in the Mahayana sutras, which say that Sariputta did not understand the Buddha's teachings, that he had inferior wisdom and all that.